Okay, so welcome to, I think this is our fourth deep dive. This one will focus on, this one will focus on apprenticeship standards. And it's wonderful, actually, that this is not just a California group. If you haven't already put on your name, rename yourself, just put your state so we know who's here. If you don't know how to do that or you don't want to do that, just put it in the chat, just so we know how many states are represented. And given that, Matt will, adjust his comments accordingly. So I'm Randy Wolf. I'm the executive director and founder of ECEPT, for those of you who I don't know. And these deep dives are exactly what that's why we call them that. We find topics that seem to have a sort of broad, if not universal appeal. And then we take an hour to just really explore it. So we've done one on the role of employers and one on the role of success coordinators. We did one with the DAS, the Division of Apprenticeship Standards person here in California, about funding. And today we're going to talk about standards. So I'm not really good at formal introductions, but I will just tell you, and then Matt can add whatever he wants. Matt is the executive director of the Institute for American Apprenticeships. And from my vantage point, he is like a national intermediary in that he works with apprenticeship programs all over the country and helps them with lots of things. One of the pieces being both developing, writing, and submitting apprenticeship standards, but also helping people understand the registered apprenticeship system, helping them understand how to communicate with their state or federal, office, and that kind of stuff. So I've asked him to do sort of a presentation, but then to leave plenty of time for Q&A, because this kind of topic in particular, you really have to have, be able to ask questions, because it's just all so specific. And so for most of us, it's so bizarre. It's just not something we really know a lot about. So with that somewhat inelegant introduction, Matt, I'm going to turn this over to you. And I'm putting you back on so I can see you as spotlight, and take it away.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Yeah, so as Randy shared, Matt with the Institute for American Apprenticeship, and we do essentially what Randy had shared. We participate in all aspects of apprenticeship, but in addition to apprenticeship, we help organizations across the country with workforce development solutions. We prefer apprenticeship for a variety of reasons, mostly because it allows employers and the participants or the apprentices to access benefits that otherwise don't exist outside of the registered apprenticeship system. That said, we help people register, we help people implement programs, we implement programs on people's behalf. As it relates to our relationship with ECEPS, they were already well on their journey. We provide guidance, or if you think of us as the guardrails along the interstate, this group is speeding down the interstate, and we just make sure that they stay on the road as it relates to apprenticeship. But as it relates to services, if people are curious about what we provide, we'll help you with just about anything as it relates to apprenticeship. So the conversation today is supposed to be centered around the development of apprenticeship standards and the registration of a new program. So one of the things based on states that I'm going to share, and this is always everybody's favorite topic, is that process looks a little different depending on what state you're in. So you're either in one of three types of states. You're in an office of apprenticeship state, an OA state, you're in an SAA state, which is a state apprenticeship agency state, or you're in the great state of California, which has a recipe that's just a little different than the others or the rest. So this map and this website does a good job laying out which states are SAA states and which states are OA states by color code. And again, California has DAS, right, which is modeled after a state apprenticeship agency. It's just run by the state. So technically California is an OA state, but it has an entity in the state run by California that behaves very much like an SAA state. So the Department of Apprenticeship Standards, like if you are in California, you'll have to work through their approval process to get your standards approved, and we'll talk about that. I can drop this website chat. It's helpful, because I believe there's a lot of good information there. You know, as you're researching or exploring apprenticeship, there's bulletins, circulars, some of the tens and tegels. So if you've got questions specific to apprenticeship, this is a pretty good landing page to get started. Now, another thing that we'll spend some time talking about is Rapids and the system in which the DOL will guide you to build your standards. Oftentimes the feedback I get from people when they're reach out to their apprenticeship training representative, which is an ATR, they're an employee of the DOL. They exist in every state, whether you're an OA or SAA state. If you tell them that you're interested in building standards, what they're going to do is they're going to send you to a website called the Standards Builder. You'll have to set up a Rapids account, and they'll guide you how to do that. But then up in this Rapids tab, there's a Standards Builder tab here. And then that brings you to this site, which is intended to be a guide to allow you to build standards on your own. And how you do that is you hit this little link here that says create new standards. And then you would say, or choose, my organization is a sponsor, or we're acting on behalf of another sponsor, right? So you're either sponsoring apprenticeship, or you're going to, as an organization, or you're going to be essentially a sponsor of other employers, allowing people to leverage your standards. And that's, if we were going to build these for Randy, we would click on acting on behalf, because she sponsors other employers. We're not going to go through this, because I will tell you people's experience, especially if you don't have a lot of past experience or previous knowledge as it relates to apprenticeship, it's been frustrating with this system. We've had to help a lot of people. Again, this is where they'll guide you. If we back up, I will say that these resources right here are pretty good to get you started. There's a sample Appendix A. There's a reference guide. This reference guide, if you download it, does a decent job walking through the definitions and some standards if you need it as a reference for the future. But again, sometimes these resources are hard to find, hard to navigate. There's some definitions at the bottom. So what we're going to spend our time doing today is I'm going to show you a standards template, and we're going to walk through what that standards builder would build for you. And then I'll show you some examples of some apprenticeship standards that have been completed to help you or give you an opportunity to ask questions. And this is similar to the activity that we did at the ECEPS conference in the standards builder working session. Another example or another starting point, if you're really stuck, the Urban Institute got a grant several years ago to build some competency frameworks for apprenticeship programs and appendices. So it provides some work process schedules. And there is an education tab here that you can click on. And there is an early childhood educator example here that you can use. So if you click on this, it's going to pull up a PDF. This is not perfect, and likely you will have to adjust it, but this is a good jumping off spot if you were going to try to navigate this on your own. You could, in fact, submit this as is, as long as you had related instruction associated with it, and it would get approved by the DOL. And the reason for that is part of the process of Urban submitting these frameworks is that the DOL approved them. So you can see here in 21, the DOL sent out this bulletin to all the ATRs, essentially making them aware that that framework that you were just looking at was to be approved or recognized as sort of a baseline occupation for early childhood education.
Matt, what's an ATR?
Apprenticeship Training Representative.
Okay.
So again, this is important for you to understand because it will get approved. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to meet the needs of your program, but it's a good start to get a set of standards approved. So again, those competency-based frameworks through Urban Institute can be a good resource if you're looking to start from scratch and you want a framework to base it off. The other way to do it is work with an organization that has standards registered, and they may be willing to share those with you or help you get started. And there's people on this call that have that experience. Are there any questions based on what I've shared so far? Okay. Hearing none, I'm going to start with the DOL forms that are required to register an apprenticeship program. Right, so we're going to start with a registered apprenticeship standard template for non-CBA occupations, meaning these are for occupations that are not represented by a union. Now, you can also use this template with an organization that is represented, like teachers. But to do that, you've got to get a letter from a union that says, this in no way impacts the CBA, and that they're open to you registering and running an apprenticeship program. Otherwise, you have to use a template that includes the CBA. But the preferred way, or what we encourage clients to do, is, if possible, use this template and get that support letter, because it gives you a little more flexibility in the delivery of your program. But again, template, this is pretty standard information where they're going to sign off. It talks about the roles and responsibilities of a sponsor. This is all information that's also found in 29 CFR 29. It's legalese that you really don't change. But if we were building these together, I would walk you through the pros and cons of some of these options, right? So minimum qualifications, you put your qualifications here. And this is for all occupations in your standards, right? So this is minimum qualifications for your standards, because these are apprenticeship standards. We haven't gotten to your occupations yet. Those are in the appendices that we'll talk about in a moment. So it talks about apprenticeship approach and terms. So is this going to be a competency-based? Is it going to be a time-based? And how long is it going to be? That will be defined in your Appendix A. The work process schedule and related instructions. So those are the competencies that somebody's looking to develop, and the education that you're going to provide in your apprenticeship program also will be defined in your Appendix A. Section E, the credit for prior learning and experience. So this is an important lever for flexibility in apprenticeship programs that a lot of people don't think about or take advantage of. So you can, per the DOL, now this is different if you're in an SAA state, you have to understand what your state regs are. But per the DOL, you can give somebody credit for prior experience. So the OJT piece of an apprenticeship program, you can give them credit for everything with the exception of the last 6 months. They have to be in a program for a minimum of 6 months. You have to have documented proof that they have experience, but you can accelerate somebody's status in an apprenticeship program up to the last 6 months. With related instruction per the DOL, meaning the education portion, as long as you have documented proof that they participated in that education, you can give them up to 100% credit for prior learning. But that has to happen either upon enrollment in the program or during the probationary period. Once you leave that probationary period, you cannot award credit for prior learning or experience without having to reach out to your ATR, your apprenticeship training representative, and get an exception to do that. The probationary period cannot exceed 25% of your total term. We encourage most employers or sponsors to maximize that probationary period, so always use the 25%, because that 25% gives you longer to account for credit for prior experience and also provides some protections for the employer and the apprentice. The wage schedule, every apprentice has to have a wage schedule in there. So it talks about what the starting pay rate is, what the incremental pay increases will be as the apprentice earns or is gaining skill and competence. The intent of apprenticeship program is that their pay will increase with that as well. The apprenticeship model is intended, and I share this knowing the audience because this can be a touchy subject, and we're talking about roles that are not high paying to begin with. So this is not a recommendation for these roles. I'm just sharing with you what the intent of an apprenticeship program was to be. Apprenticeships are designed to allow an employer to bring somebody in and pay them less than they would somebody that's fully competent, with the intent that the employer is investing in that individual more than they would somebody that was fully competent and they were onboarding. So as somebody gains skill, they move up in this pay scale, and you set this up or you document it in your appendix. And when upon completion they meet or they have to be paid what's called the journey worker wage, or the wage of somebody that's fully competent. Again, you have to think creatively in ECEPs related or early care and education roles, early childhood education roles and teaching roles, sorry, because these roles are often relatively low paying to start anyway. So you just want to make sure that you take that into consideration. You have to be an equal employee, you have to abide by equal employment opportunity laws and an affirmative action plan. The affirmative action plan, you're not required to submit one if you have less than 5 apprentices and you've had a program for less than 2 years. If you're working with an apprenticeship sponsor, you can roll up under the sponsor's affirmative action plan, meaning if you're a small employer and say that you registered with ECEPs and they were your sponsor, the responsibility of the affirmative action plan would actually be the sponsors or ECEPs in that case. And then you as a small employer would just be required to abide by their plan and submit the demographic data required for them to report. Selection procedures. So your selection procedure has to be documented. We've got some standard language that we put in templates with clients, but if you have a specific selection procedure, you should put it in there. You have to follow it, and you're responsible for the fact that it's legal or complies with the law. You have to have a complaint procedure. You list somebody in your organization that can field those complaints, or if you're sponsoring, you have to list somebody in your organization that can field complaints from some of the employers you're sponsoring. And then if it has to go beyond there, it goes to a resource at the Department of Labor. I've been working in apprenticeship for a very, 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 very long time. And I've never seen a concern go beyond the employer. Like, I've not seen something elevated to the DOL. So registration agency, information, reciprocity for programs as it relates to states. If you have national standards, we're going to spend a minute talking about that. And then there's these attachments that we'll talk about. There's the Appendix A, which is, think about it as your training plan, but it describes your individual programs or occupations. Your Appendix B is the 671 of the apprenticeship agreement. Each apprentice has to fill out that form. We talked about the affirmative action plan already, which is Appendix C. Appendix D is the employer acceptance agreement, and you only have that form attached to your standards if you're somebody that's intending to sponsor other employer apprentice. So if you are just applying to only enroll, you are the employer and you will only be enrolling apprentice under your employment, your standards will not have an Appendix D attached. But we'll look at the Appendix D quickly. So let's circle back to reciprocity for a minute, and then I promise I will pause, take a breath, and I will ask if anybody has any questions. So there's 2 types of standards that you can apply for. There's actually 3, but we're only going to talk about 2 for the sake of this conversation. There's your apprenticeship standards that are national apprenticeship standards, but they're only good in your state. so that you can register and enroll in a set of standards in the state in which you do business. If you are an organization that does business in 5 states or more, and you can apprentice in at least 3 of them within the first year of the registration of your program, you're eligible for what's called national apprenticeship standards that actually are good in every state. But we talked a little bit about the difference between states, meaning OA states that are states that rely or default to the Office of Apprenticeship, or SAA states that have a state apprenticeship agency that act on behalf of the Office of Apprenticeship. OA states, your national standards are good in an OA state. Reciprocity exists. The DOL already recognizes it. With an SAA state, there has to be a process for reciprocity, but the SAA gets to define that. And you have to work with your state apprenticeship agency to understand what that process is. The asterisk to this, and something that's evolving, and this likely applies to many of the people on this call, if you're dealing with an occupation that has specific local credentials and criteria, say they change state by state, school system by school system, you may have a difficult time getting national standards approved with the current thinking of the DOL, because they do have some question, or there's some pushback nationally about how effective national standards can be if there's different requirements at every state that have to be resolved or thought through. So we've seen some pushback as it relates to some of those programs. An example for a recent one is nursing. We're having a difficult time getting national standards for nursing. I would assume it's going to be the same if we ever were to attempt for a teacher occupation. We have not yet attempted national standards with a teacher occupation. That said, are there any questions on the standards? Because this is the boilerplate documentation, with the exception of a little bit of information that you would provide, that you would submit. Okay.
Matt, I have a question.
Oh, go ahead,
Okay.
Lisa.
Hi, Matt. Just for clarification, could you explain again what does non-CBA stand for, and how's that related to the union?
So CBA stands, it's a very good question. CBA stands for collective bargaining agreement.
Oh, got it. Now I know. Okay. Got it. I was like, what is this?
Right.
And
Sorry,
so
no,
there's a distinction between a union standards and non-unionized standards?
Yes, and some states, some SAAs will call that joint versus non-joint. So joint is you're applying with a union, non-joint you are applying independently. Again, we provide templates often to employers or partners that are trying to file non-CBA standards, because non-CBA allows you, so there's many occupations across the country. Some are represented by unions, some are not, and sometimes that exists in the same employer. So you need standards that can apply to both. And again, apprenticeship programs, and often the training programs, and many of the training programs that you are all thinking about building or have built, really have zero impact on a collective bargaining agreement, right? Most of that happens prior to their employment or prior to them joining the union. And you're not trying to influence that one way or the other. You're just trying to make them qualified for the job. So if you're able to sit down and have a conversation with a union representative, oftentimes that logic can prevail, and they recognize that, in fact, you're helping them by making people qualified to determine whether or not they want to participate in the union. Then you can often get that letter signed and approved. Now, sometimes you can't, and you as sponsors have to determine whether or not you would move forward with a joint set of standards. But the key difference is, in a set of apprenticeship standards, there is a selection procedure. Meaning there is a process as it relates to selecting candidates. CBAs do not include an ability to participate in the selection process. When you file a joint set of standards with a union, that includes them, or they then have authority oftentimes to participate in the selection procedure. So that that's the biggest differentiation, and that's for you all to determine whether or not that's something that impacts your program or not. If it, it may not, but that's typically the differentiation that people are considering when they're trying to do joint versus non-joint, or CBA versus non-CBA standards. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you so much, Matt. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Matt, let me ask one follow-up, and if you said it and I missed it, I apologize. I don't know if this was just a specific case or if this is the general case, but I know of a specific case in which there was a union, and I don't remember where this was written, if it was in the standards or if it was in the collective bargaining agreement, but the idea was if the union said, yes, we will participate in this thing, but if there's any disagreement between what's in the standards and what's in the collective bargaining agreement, the collective bargaining agreement wins. So for example,
go ahead, keep going.
So for example, if the collective bargaining agreement said that a mentor or a coach or a lead supervising teacher could not mentor more than 3 teachers, let's say, but the apprenticeship standard said they could mentor 4, well, 3 would be the limit because that's what's in the collective bargaining agreement. Is that a standard thing, or is that something specific that we dealt with?
Here,
the idea where the collective bargaining comes into play versus the stand when it's in conflict.
So we've put language in appendices before. I think we did this with yours, Randy, that talked about the fact that if there's a CBA in place, it always has authority. So we always default to the language in the CBA.
Right.
Because CBAs are not drawn to control apprenticeship. It's more about
Workers.
Putting language in there to ensure a union that in no way are you trying to impact a CBA. So if they're looking at it and signing it, they realize that you're not.
That's
What's
right.
interesting, Randy, is recently that language has been pulled out by the DOL. So the ATRs have been pulling that out, essentially saying it's not necessary. They're trying to optimize the documents and make them consistent.
Oh,
so
since the apprentices aren't employees per se, they're not union members yet, right? So then the CBA is binding over them?
Well, we used to put that language in there because we wanted to make sure it was stated, but even if you take it out, that's still the case. So they're just seeing it as unnecessary language in standards. And I think in an effort to try to standardize, another thing they've talked about that I can show you on one that an appendix that's recently been approved. We used to have to put all the training descriptions in for each course in the RTI. They take all those out now too.
Oh, wow.
So the documents themselves have become much less detailed, which has pros and cons. So quickly, let's look at an Appendix A. So this is an Appendix A, and this is just for a production operator role, but it's going to talk about the fact that there's a work process.
Wait, I'm not seeing it. Matt, are you sharing?
I am not sharing. Thank you for calling that out. I am talking to myself.
Got it.
All right. So this is the title page. If you had submitted this, your organization name would be here. And then your occupation title would be here. The DOL title for that occupation would be in parentheses here. You can call a role whatever you want. That's an important thing to remember. So there's many occupations that are listed as apprenticeable by the DOL. And tied to every one of those occupations is an ONET code that has job competency descriptions associated with it. You can adjust those. So you need to look at those occupations as foundational building blocks. You can use whatever title you want. And actually you can make significant changes to that role as long as it's at the same level and it's using 80% of the competencies associated with it. And this is where a lot of people get hung up when they're trying to develop occupations. Likely not so much in this field because there's a pretty good selection, but people try to find an occupation that exactly matches the one they're looking for, exactly titled like it, and that's not required. You can make adjustments, and that's why they have these Appendix A's, because that's where you're going to define your role. But then there's this ONET code and Rapids code for reference. And then again, that same information is going to show up on your title block up here. But this is where we start to define some of the things that were in the apprenticeship standards, right? So for this particular occupation, you get to select, is it time-based, competency-based, or hybrid? I will tell you, competency-based is the most modern and flexible way to leverage apprenticeship, meaning you get to measure somebody's competence. They're still in the occupation for a period of time, but the way in which you document competence and verify that is much more fluid than time-based. Time-based, you have to record every hour somebody's working, and you don't have to do that with a competency-based program. But
Matt, it bears repeating, and tell me if I got this wrong, but my understanding is even with a competency-based program, the apprentice has to do a minimum of 2,000 hours of on-the-job training.
Right, and that's
some of which can be grandfathered in, like you were explaining before.
Correct. It's a point of contention because the language is not clear, but there is a bulletin out there that talks about the fact that an apprenticeship program, regardless of the approach, has to be a minimum of 2,000 hours. It will the DOL will not approve it if it's less than 2,000 hours, and it has to have 144 hours of related instruction
minimum
per year, minimum. But again, typically with ECE and educator roles, neither of those things are an issue. But if you're really trying to make or optimize or make a short apprenticeship program, those are the minimums to get approved. So apprentice ratio to journey worker. So it's important to understand that journey worker doesn't necessarily mean mentor. A lot of people get those two terms, they line them up. That's not what journey worker means. What this ratio means is you need to so 3 to 1 is the most you can get approved without approval, special approval from the DOL. So and this isn't any occupation. Some of them, they won't let you go more than 1 to 1. And I'll give you an example in a second. So that means 3 apprentice to every journey worker. And that doesn't mean 3 apprentice to every mentor. What it means is your organizational makeup. You can never be in a situation where you have more than 3 apprentice to every one fully qualified person in that role, meaning they're trying to set a threshold as to how many fully qualified people you can have to support apprentice that are developing competencies, right? So 3 to 1 they'll approve. 1 to 1 is something that's commonly used. I've seen as much as 5 to 1 get approved, but you need special exception for that. An example where 5 to 1 might be appropriate is, say, software developers, right? We're not worried about people's safety. There's not little people's lives that we're worried about or looking after. They're sitting at a computer, they're relatively safe, and somebody can manage that, that many people. An example that I like to use that requires 1 to 1 is a nuclear power facility technician, right? And I don't know about the rest of you, but it makes me happy to know that there's not somebody brand new at a nuclear power plant without somebody 1 to 1 able to oversee their ability to learn that role. That makes me feel better. So Matt, again, you can go as much as 3 to 1 in this ratio. Go ahead, Randy.
Okay, number one, I think pretty much all our programs are 4 to 1, by the way.
But it is true, Randy, but remember yours have been approved for a while.
Oh, and this is a new shift kind of?
The changes with it. Remember when the new templates came out? Because you helped convert we converted some of your occupations to the new templates. Around that same time, any new occupation to be more than 3 to 1, it's not that you can't get it done, it's just there's a special approval process. But
I found what you explained confusing but important. So I want to put it in terms of the ECE world. So first of all, do I have it right that a journey, you were saying the thing that distinguishes journey workers from mentors. The journey worker has to be qualified for the position for which the apprentice is being trained.
Correct.
Okay, so if we have an apprenticeship with, let's say, is training associate teachers.
Yeah.
Then you need at least, let's say we have 15 apprentices with a 3-to-1 ratio, then you'd need at least 5 associate teachers already on staff in order to accept 15 apprentices training to be associate teachers.
That's correct.
Okay,
Now, the piece about mentors,
yeah, that's
those-
the next thing.
okay, those 5 people don't have to be mentors. They likely are,
Right.
but they don't have to be.
And the ratio with mentors is completely up to us. In other words, if we want a mentor to be a 1-on-1 or a 1-to-2, that's up to us.
Right. That's a different number than this.
Okay.
You're
So I
absolutely
would
right.
say for the people on this call, in general, the way ECEPS thinks about this is, so we, meeting that ratio of people who are qualified for the position for which people are being trained, qualified for that position or a higher position. Is that right, Matt?
Correct.
Okay, so that's usually not a hard thing. In our mind, a mentor should not have a big caseload, unless that's their full-time job or something like that. So we don't look at this ratio to have any direct bearing on the way we think about our mentorship ratio and the mentorship, relationship and all the rest.
Right. So
Terry,
we're going to go
I was
through.
asking a question in the chat box.
Somebody's asking a question in the chat. I can't. Here we go.
I
Oh
actually,
no, I just see a link.
my question is actually, the ratio, is that per work site or is that just across the employer?
So that is across the employer, but I think you'd want to be conscious of it per work site. I've never seen a level of question or scrutiny come under, or an employer come under the level of scrutiny where they were checking per work site. And again, I think if you think about ECE facilities or school systems, there's requirements for those facilities that are going to have those roles in place already, right? You're going to likely meet that threshold anyway, but it's employer. It's not per facility, employer. Employer in a state, because they're going to want to. If you're a national employer, you're not going to be able to say, well, I'm in California and my organization in Maine has X number of. So this is an example of an apprenticeship wage schedule. So the DOL only requires 1 increase in the term of an apprenticeship program. So there's an example here where it's talking about every 6 months. This is what makes sense to your organization and your occupation. They like to see once a year, and they like to see an opportunity as you're increasing. So maybe 25% competent, 50% competent, or you can use numbers of competencies. So if you've got 8 competencies, somebody's competent in 2, they're competent in 4, but it's only required to have 1 increase. And the interesting thing about a wage schedule, right? So it has to apply with all minimum wage laws and the like. So you can't pay somebody less than that regardless. You can always pay somebody more than a wage schedule. So if your wage schedule is less than what you're hiring at, that's fine. It doesn't matter. What you cannot do is pay somebody less. So when you're submitting standards, especially if you have organizations that you're representing that are across multiple counties, or especially in California, if you think about your regions, you're going to want to make sure that you consider the region that pays the lowest, because again, you can always pay more, but you can't pay less. Probationary period we talked about, it's listed in weeks, but it can't be more than 25% of your term length. We talked a little bit about the selection procedure. And then this is your work process schedule, where you would list your competencies. And then here you would list your related instruction or your coursework. And I'll show you.
Matt, before you jump ahead, so I heard you say that with the courses, nowadays, you don't even have to put a course description, just the course title. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, I'll show you. So this is.
Well, that was just my introductory statement. Here's my question. On the work processes, like in ours, we always put like the 10 competencies that we use that are reflective of the California early educator competencies. But then we put sort of detailed examples. Like, so it'll say, understands child development. And then we put A, understands, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. B, demonstrates, da, 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 and C, something or another. Are we going further than we need to for the purposes of standards?
Yes, other than the fact that I think yours were intended to provide guidance for participants.
Right,
So-
exactly. But we could just as well develop that outside of the standards, right?
You're absolutely right. So this is a work process schedule for a teacher occupation that just got approved by the DOL in California. So these are the competencies. Now, the way
Wow.
this is laid out, right, is the competency is professionalism, and these are taken right from standards in California.
Oh, so see, that's the thing. So they are giving examples. That's the
They're
same
list-
way we
they're-
do. We
they're-
do child development with 3 examples. Working with children, with families and communities, 3 examples.
These statements have to be actionable. Like, these have to
Yes.
be actions that you can perform.
Yes, yes, yes.
And then classroom environment. And see how this sign off can also be used by the apprenticeship. So demonstrates fundamentals, proficient in task, completion date. The reason it's important to show you these, and the reason why I showed you the standard builder, this format or this template, this chart that you see, that's not in standards builder. Like, these documents won't be as usable when you build them in standards. They don't come out quite as logical. But with templates like this, they can be done. So again, these are the work process of the competencies. These are what are called behavioral competencies that are loaded in. So you can measure individuals as it relates to their behavioral competence. It provides a nice framework to give feedback. And then this is related instruction. And this is the question that you had, Randy. So what we used to do is we'd list these topics,
With
and then
samples.
on the pages following, there'd be sample descriptions of them all. And the ones we've submitted recently, they've taken them off, so they're not needed. So these are the courses. So one thing that I want to call out here in this role, and it's a good strategy with any role, and it's sort of the secret sauce as it relates to writing flexible appendices. So there's 2 different buckets of course topics here in your related instruction schedule. One is core and one is as assigned. So with both work processes, so the competencies, and the related instruction or the courses, you can have core topics that every apprentice is going to take, right? But then you build in these as assigned topics, and those as assigned topics give you flexibility, meaning you can have more topics down there than any apprentice might need, but then you can choose the ones that your specific apprentice needs depending on their pathway. So a teacher might have a specialization, or to get your teaching degree in this example, you likely have to take general education requirements, right, to complete your degree outside of the teacher. So these as assigned courses and the ranges and the hours in the as assigned courses give you the opportunity to
your
be more
general ed
flexible with your
requirement,
apprenticeship.
Yeah.
Any questions on that?
But so it looks like they didn't do what I said in terms of, they didn't just put, go back to the competencies. They actually did, they didn't just say, for example, I can't see now, they didn't just say assessment. They actually
No.
did put examples
Right.
of it.
You have to have actionable statements, but I
Okay.
actually think your initial ones, and I think I've got one here, I can pull it up. I think the initial ones we put in for you are really detailed, Randy.
Yes, yes. Well, we simplified it some as we got smarter about it, but you don't need to show it. It's okay. It's okay. I want to have time for open questions.
No, but see here, so you've got your,
Oh,
it just looks a little different. You've got them listed with some bullets underneath.
right. But that's also because, yes, we now use that thing which is listed in the standards. We use it as our competency-based assessment
Sign-off
tool.
form. Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so
Good.
so we talked about the other documents, and I don't know that it makes a lot of sense for us to go through any more of the DOL documents. What I think I want to do is show you the DAS forms for those people in California. So the process to get registered in California can happen one of 2 ways. You can contact your DAS representative. There's some wonderful people that work there. I work with a gentleman called Kawa all the time. He actually co-presented with me at the ECEPS conference. You can call him up and say that you want to register a program in California, and he will help you with the DOL standards process, and you will submit dual standards and register with both California, the DOL and California at the same time. Our experience tells us that's not the optimized way to do it. Like the other pathway is to register directly with DOL and get them approved, and then and make Doug or make DAS aware that you're doing it. And then once they're approved, leverage the cover letter process in California to then get your standards approved through DAS. So then it only goes through the DAS process. The DAS process differs from the DOL in the sense that DAS evaluates your standards. There's a couple of changes they're likely going to make to your standards to ensure that they're compliant for like a people that need adaptive technology, like a reader, like a web reader. So they'll remove some of the formatting to ensure that they can be read by a reader. But they'll do that for you, or we can help you put it in that template prior to submission. And then once you submit, they attach and approve the cover letter. If you work with somebody like Doug, who's fantastic, he fills the cover letter out for you and make sure it's correct. But then it gets posted on the DIR website for 30 days for public comment. And if there's any comments posted as it relates to your apprenticeship program, those comments have to be resolved before it can be approved. Likely where those comments come in, or if there's some level of contention, there's a statute in California that says if your apprenticeship program has reasonable overlap with an existing program, and that program submits comments, essentially stating there's reasonable overlap, that it could prevent you from getting approved. We've seen it happen a lot in represented occupations in California, meaning, you know, traditional trades. If you put a traditional trade occupation up there, it's unlikely to get it through the posting process. But that said, if you work with partners and try to work through it, it's fine. But I will tell you, based on my experience, even in advanced manufacturing in the last 2 years, I've gotten one occupation through. Several have been denied based on comments because they come too close to traditional trade programs. And there's not a real good definition of what reasonable overlap is, right? That's not really a well thought out legal description of how to compare a program, because I could tell you, I could make up all kinds of definitions of reasonable overlap. But once your program posts for 30 days and there's no comments, it gets pulled down. Your DAS representative lets you know that they've submitted it for final approval, and Chief Rude signs it, and you get a cover letter that looks, and your standards with a cover letter that looks very much like, see if this is the right set. Nope, this is not. Very much like ECEPS standards that look like this. So it's the DOL standards with a letter from California signed by Chief Rude. But this cover letter has got all the information California needs to approve your standards. And again, working with DAS, they fill this cover letter out for you. They didn't used to do this, but they now help you fill it out to ensure that it's correct. And then you can see here that Randy signed it upon approval in 2021. When we did this one, Randy had to fill her own out. now they do it for you. Probably based on the feedback that Randy provided in the process. So those forms are right here, and they can be found on the DAS website. So here is the template for that cover sheet that you work with your DAS representative to fill out, and it gets submitted. Now, again, like the DOL, you also have to have a DAS-1 form, which is a the California version of the 671 or the employer subscription agreement. There's drop and completion forms that have to be filled out in California. To get a program approved in the state of California, you have to have an LEA sign off. So a letter from typically a community college or an education institution that says that they approve of your program. And then this employer subscription agreement, if you have a program that you're sponsoring employers or you want employers to sign on to your standards, you also need to have them fill out this employer subscription agreement. And you have to do, in California, you have to do all these documents in conjunction with the documents with the DOL. So they don't replace one another. And that's the only place that happens is in California. And that's why it can be confusing with people from California. I'm sorry if you can see these Teams messages popping up on my screen. So in any other state, whether you're OA or SAA state, you're going to follow that state's process and you're going to use one set of documentation. In California, because DAS is outside of the US DOL, there's what often feels like duplicative documentation. And there's also two systems that you have to keep your data in. So there's the RAPID system, and there's also the DAS system. Now, it's extra work, and it's not required to register with DAS to have an apprentice in California, but it is worth your while because there is extensive funding associated with being registered with DAS. And many of the state level grants in California that include apprenticeship require registration with DAS. But once you understand the process, it's just, it's another set of documents that you walk your employer through. They're relatively easy to get filled out. And honestly, even if you're a sponsor, you can often come to them with them filled out, walk them through them and have them signed.
So Matt, I'm looking at the clock.
I know this
So
is
we
a tough
wrap-
one.
Was there more you want to say about this?
No, I want to answer people's questions and
Well,
if there's any follow-up.
Here's the thing. What I did was I put your email address in the chat box, and I put also the website for the Institute for American Apprenticeships so that folks can easily follow up with you. And what I would say, because the questions that would be asked are going to be very, very specific, and what's relevant in Nebraska may not be relevant in Illinois and that kind of thing. So it may be okay that we ran out of time. But I would encourage those of you, especially those of you from outside of California, in my experience over the last 8 years, it has been enormously helpful to have the IAA and Matt in particular as our reference point and our mentor and our teacher. This is a complicated system. None of us were trained in it. And they are, they will talk to you. They will also set up a contract with you to really do work for you on your behalf. And it's not an exorbitant cost. And I say that as an ECE, very cognizant of the limitations under which we function. So I think that's the best we're going to do for today, is to share your email, share your website, and to say thank you very much, Matt, because you are always a reliable source and wealth of information, and we appreciate it. And thanks everybody for coming, especially those of you who traveled so far from all these states around the country. Oh, good, Gladys, I'm glad you laughed. And we probably will not do a deep dive in July, and I don't remember if we decided about August. We will definitely be sort of back on track in September. So with that, let me say goodbye and thank you, and have a good rest of your day.